There are many tales about prisons. Stories about the monsters that are kept inside, the wardens of such prisons, or how these prisons came to be. Prisons are meant to keep things locked up, so it's ironic that most stories about prisons tell about their failings. Stories of how their walls are broken down, how someone slips through the cracks and escapes. Today we look at one such prison from the visual novel game Slay the Princess. This is the story of The Construct, a prison made for gods.
This is a bad place. We're supposed to be together, but it keeps making us hurt each other.
The Construct is the main, and indeed the only setting of Slay the Princess. It is the woods, the hill, the cabin, and the basement where you find the princess. But it is also a prison made by the narrator when he tore apart the cycle of life and death and split it into two. The long quiet and the princess. Stasis and change. He puts the two of them inside the construct, created a scenario, then tried to convince one prisoner to end the other. But what exactly is the construct? If we go by the dictionary definitions, it is described as something constructed by the mind, such as a theoretical entity, working hypothesis or concept. Quite an interesting name for a prison, and something that gets expanded upon when you ask the narrator about the peculiars of the construct. He says,
"This construct you're in exists in many places at once. Anytime you failed, anytime you thought yourself dead, it would restart and shunt both your consciousness and hers into another world."
And this tells us quite a lot about the construct. For one, it should be obvious that this is not a mere physical prison, but rather a conceptual one that is stretched across multiple realities, one with a clear set of operations and instructions. A conceptual cage for two living gods. It makes sense, but it still raises the question, how did the narrator make it? Looking for the answer, however, will not provide any clarity.
And for all I know, each of those other versions of me could have had entirely different understandings of how this construct works. Who's to say which of them are right and which of them are wrong, really?
This statement is quite confusing. How can different versions of him have different understandings of how the construct functions? They all share the same memories, and we know for a fact that the original narrator created the construct before he died, else he couldn't have put a part of himself into the construct. Something here doesn't add up. After all, how could one make a prison without knowing how it works? Maybe the narrator doesn't know how the construct works, but we can figure it out ourselves by putting together the facts and looking for the bigger picture.
You're on a path in the woods, and at the end of that path is a cabin. And in the basement of that cabin is a princess.
We do know that the inside of the construct superficially resemble a normal world with trees, grass and the sky. But it is all an illusion. Something that can be clearly seen in the roots where the construct breaks down over several repeated loops, and the background gets replaced with the long quiet.
You make your way up the short path to the cabin. You'll find the princess within.
Every simulated reality within the construct starts like this, but this soon devolves and deteriorates till the path, the basement, and the princess look completely different. But one thing remains the same: the cabin's exterior itself. Sure, the path to it changes, and the interior is different, but the exterior is always a wooden cabin, even if this is incompatible with the space and features from the inside. The only exceptions to these are moment of clarity and apotheosis. But besides these extreme circumstances, it is an odd detail.
That's all the more reason to take this seriously. If the path isn't the same, it means that her influence is spreading, and the world has already started to end.
At face value, this makes sense, but once you start thinking about it, it's a bit odd, right? We know that the princess is a creature of perception. She is change. Yet we never hear anything about her perception-based effects extending to the world around her. The princess is the one that shifts, but she isn't the whole world, right? But even if this were true, then the question remains why the cabin doesn't change alongside the environment. Surely, if the world changing was her doing, the cabin would shift with her. The cabin itself is the true prison of the princess. The chains can break, the door can be opened, but the princess can never leave the cabin on her own, despite her changing form and the shifting interior. Even as a ghost that can phase through objects, the cabin remains a cage.
I've tried to leave on my own. Before you came back to me, I explored every inch of this place, even the spaces between the walls. But I never found a way out. I always wound up right back here.
Only the long quiet can leave and enter the cabin whenever he feels like, and the princess can only leave if the player wills it so. Either by allowing her to leave the cabin, or by intentionally luring her out of it. But that's not the only strange thing about the cabin. There's something even stranger about the cabin, something that's mentioned once in the Beast Route and never again.
I understand it, and it understands me. Talking is for those who don't know how to listen.
It is alive. The cabin is alive, just as much as the princess and the long quiet. But how can a cabin be alive? We need to leave behind the path, the cabin, and the basement. If you refuse to go to the cabin or finish a route, you will find yourself back in the long quiet. If you pay attention to the background, you'll see the walls of the construct, the outer shell. But what are these walls made of? It's a detail that's quite easy to miss, but these are feathers. This isn't just a stylistic choice either. If you go for the unending dawn ending, the game describes you breaking the construct with your wings. You feel your wings spanning a cosmic scale, but twisted and crumpled and bound in agonizing tension to a finite plane. And your own wings are the walls of the construct. You are part of the construct's foundations. It makes sense. After all, you yourself are an abstract concept. But if we take it a little further, what if it isn't just the outer shell of the construct that is you? It sounds absurd at first, but things start to make sense. The reason why you're the only one who can leave the cabin at will is the same reason why it always has the same shape and why the beast claims it is sentient. The cabin, like the walls of the construct, is part of you. But we can take it even further. About the princess.
Even then, both of us are more than our bodies. Am I not in the trees? Am I not in the cabin? Am I not in you?
The woods change because of her. But what happens when you slay the princess and open the door of the cabin? There's nothing outside. The woods go away if there's no her. Now we have all the pieces, we can put together the story of the construct. Faced with oblivion and the end of everything he knew and loved, the narrator tore the cycle of life and death into two. It was messy, never been done before. We had to try something, anything, to stop the end of everything. Miraculously, he succeeded and managed to split the cycle into two gods.
Her nature is why I had to die, for she becomes that which others perceive her to be.
The narrator, however, was not prepared for the princess's true nature. He was stuck with a creature that he couldn't kill nor trap, for she was change itself. But even worse, now that he was aware of the princess's nature, she posed a significant risk to the world, but the threat of the princess also came with a solution. Prison created by belief. He shaped the cycle of life and death into the long quiet and the shifting mound, and then shaped them into their own prison. Two beings, intertwined and containing each other, all the while unaware they were their own wardens.
The only thing keeping us here is us.
The long quiet, the unchanging stasis formed the shell, the exterior, while the princess made up the interior of the construct, the path and the shifting basement of an unchanging cabin, a prison shaped like a conceptual matryoshka doll. A perfect prison. It explains why the narrator doesn't know how the construct functions. After all, how could one understand the abstract nature of two gods? He just shaped it into a form and hoped for the best. In light of these discoveries also makes sense. To leave the construct, the Long Quiet has to either kill the princess or choose to free himself and the princess together. And this aspect of escaping together can even be seen in the Wild Route. The princess and the Long Quiet become one, and can break the walls of the construct prematurely by just believing they can. And so the walls of the construct fall apart as the two gods free themselves from their own shackles. And honestly, isn't it a beautiful story the two have written together? The cycle of violence between the two, the lies and truth, their own beliefs, the cabin, narrator and the construct. Everything in their world exists as a shackle to their freedom, a chain without a keyhole. But by believing in something bigger than themselves and putting aside the cycle, they created their own key.
We're finally leaving here together, aren't we? And all we had to do was trust each other. It wasn't easy, but I'm glad we finally could.